The Apache girl said, "It's my room and one bed," the rancher whispered. "That's enough for us both." The wind howled across the open plains, sending dust swirling through the air. It was the kind of storm that came quickly and unexpectedly in the West, turning a bright day into a battle against nature. John Thompson, a rancher worn by years of work under the harsh sun, had been caught in its fury. His horses were nervous, their hooves skittering across the dirt as the storm began to roll in with a vengeance. He could feel the weight of the air, thick and heavy with the promise of rain. There was no shelter for miles, just the open, unforgiving land. His heart pounded as he tried to steady his horses, urging them toward a nearby ridge. He had been riding for days, hoping to reach the next town, but the storm had changed his plans. It seemed like he had no choice but to find shelter wherever he could. His mind raced, recalling any small cabin or shack that might be nearby. He had heard rumors of a woman, an Apache girl, who lived on the outskirts of the ranching territories. She was known for being solitary, fierce, and some said not to be approached lightly. As the rain began to fall in sheets, John spotted a small, weathered cabin tucked away against a rocky outcrop. It was a simple structure, small and unassuming, but it offered the only chance of safety from the storm. He kicked his horse into a gallop, feeling the wind sting his face as he approached the cabin. He dismounted quickly, leading his horse to a nearby tree for shelter before walking up to the door. With a cautious knock, he waited, praying for the kindness of whoever might be inside. There was no answer. He knocked again, louder this time, his fingers numb from the cold. He was about to turn away when the door creaked open just a crack, revealing a pair of dark eyes watching him through the gap. "Yes," came a soft voice, firm but not unkind. "I'm just looking for shelter," John said quickly, feeling the rain soak through his coat. "I'm stranded in the storm. I'll leave as soon as it clears up, I swear." The door didn't open further, but the eyes studied him, unreadable. Finally, after a long pause, the woman spoke again. "You can come in, but there's only one bed." John's brow furrowed in confusion. "Only one bed," he repeated, unsure if she was serious. The door opened a little wider and she stepped out into the rain, her silhouette sharp against the dark sky. She was tall, with long black hair that fell like a waterfall down her back. Her clothes were simple but practical, worn from years of use. She didn't look at him with hostility, but her posture was firm, unyielding. "It's my room," she said, her voice steady. "One bed, take it or leave it." John hesitated, glancing at the small cabin behind her. It didn't look like much, just a small wooden structure, a few windows, a fireplace on one side. It was simple, but it would provide the warmth he needed. "I'll take it," he said, his voice softer now, more respectful. The storm was relentless, and the thought of braving it any longer was unappealing. "Thank you." The woman stepped back, allowing him to enter, but she didn't seem to move any farther from the door. She crossed her arms, waiting. John walked into the cabin, the warmth of the fire immediately greeting him. It smelled of wood and earth, earthy and raw, like the land itself. He removed his soaked coat and hung it by the fire to dry. "You'll have to sleep there," she said, pointing to a small cot in the corner of the room. "I don't make room for strangers. You sleep there and I'll sleep here." John nodded, grateful for the roof over his head but feeling the tension that filled the space between them. He didn't want to push her, didn't want to make her feel uncomfortable, but he also couldn't ignore the strange feeling that had settled in his chest. There was something about her, something fierce and untamed, that made him both cautious and curious. "Why are you out here alone?" he asked after a long pause. It was a question he had wanted to ask since he first heard the rumors about the Apache girl who lived in these parts. She didn't answer right away, but when she did, her voice was quieter, more personal. "I'm not alone," she said simply. "I've survived, that's enough." John glanced at her, his brow furrowing in confusion. What did she mean by that? It was clear she wasn't just any woman. There was a strength in her, a power that came from the earth itself. He could feel it in the way she moved, in the way she looked at him. "I didn't mean to pry," he said, feeling the awkwardness of the moment. He had been raised to be polite, to offer kindness when it was needed. But there was something about this woman, this Apache girl, that made him feel out of place. She didn't seem to mind. "I don't care who you are," she said with a shrug, "but if you're staying here, you respect my space." John nodded again, a little taken aback by her directness. There was no sugarcoating with her, no pretending. She was who she was, and that was that. He sat by the fire for a moment, the crackling of the wood filling the silence. He didn't know how long he could stay there. Once the storm passed, he would need to get back to his ranch. But for now, he was grateful for the shelter, even if it came with its own rules. The storm raged outside, but inside, the warmth of the fire made it bearable. He glanced over at her again, but she was already sitting on the floor, her back against the wall. Her eyes were closed, but he could tell she wasn't sleeping. She was always alert, always aware of her surroundings. After a few moments, John stood, feeling the exhaustion of the day settling into his bones. "I'll sleep over there like you said," he said, gesturing to the cot. "I don't want to cause any trouble." She didn't respond but gave him a small nod, her face unreadable. John lay down on the cot, pulling the blanket around him. The night felt long, the storm outside a constant reminder of how far he was from everything he knew. But as he lay there, listening to the wind howl and the rain pound against the cabin, he couldn't shake the feeling that this night, the night he had met her, was something important. It wasn't just a storm that had brought him here. It was fate or something like it. And though they had barely spoken, he knew one thing for certain. This Apache girl, this woman who had seen the world in ways he couldn't even imagine, had the power to change everything. The storm raged on through the night, with thunder booming across the sky and rain pounding against the small cabin. John lay on his cot, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. He could hear the wind howling outside, but inside, the warmth of the fire crackling in the hearth made it feel like another world entirely. The tension in the room was palpable, thick as the smoke curling up from the flames. Naya sat cross-legged near the fire, her dark eyes watching him carefully. She had barely spoken since he entered the cabin, and John wondered what she was thinking. There was a quiet strength about her that unsettled him. She didn't need to speak loudly to be heard. Her presence alone seemed to command attention. He couldn't remember the last time he'd met someone like her. Most people, men especially, weren't as self-assured, as confident as she was. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy, like the storm outside. John shifted uncomfortably on his cot, trying to find a position where he could rest. But it was difficult with her sitting so close to him, so composed and calm, while he felt every muscle in his body tense with unease. He couldn't shake the feeling that this night would change something in him, something deep and fundamental. It wasn't just the storm or the strange situation they found themselves in. It was her. "I've seen worse storms than this." Naya's voice broke through the silence, her words slow and measured. She wasn't speaking to him directly, but it felt like she was letting him in on some secret of her own. John turned his head toward her, surprised by the sudden break in the quiet. "I'm sure you have," he said, his voice gruff but genuine. "This one's a wild one, though. It caught me by surprise." Naya looked up at the sky through the small window above the fireplace. Her eyes seemed to see something that wasn't there, something beyond the storm. "The land knows how to fight," she said, almost to herself. "It always fights, but it's only a matter of time before we learn how to survive it." John didn't understand what she meant by that, but he didn't ask. There was something in her tone that made him feel like she was speaking more to herself than to him, and he respected that. Still, the silence that followed made him uneasy again. "You've lived out here long?" he asked, trying to ease the tension between them. Naya turned to face him fully now, her dark eyes locking with his. "Long enough to know the land better than most," she said, her voice low, but there was a sharpness to it. and long enough to see what people can do when they don't respect it. John nodded, unsure what she meant by that either. Was she talking about the settlers, the ranchers like him? He wasn't sure, but the weight in her words made him think that perhaps there was more to her story than he had initially realized. He shifted again on his cot, his body stiff from hours of lying still. "I'm not here to make trouble," he said, his voice steady. "I just need shelter until the storm passes. I'll be gone as soon as I can." Naya's gaze softened slightly, but she didn't respond. Instead, she stood up and moved to the other side of the cabin, her movements fluid and graceful despite the ruggedness of the place. John watched her for a moment, taking in the way she moved, the way she seemed to belong to this land as much as the wind and the rain. She was like a part of the earth itself, untouched and unyielding. She stopped by a small wooden shelf near the corner of the cabin and took something from it, a small leather pouch. She opened it carefully, revealing a handful of dried herbs inside. John couldn't see what they were, but they smelled earthy and strong. Naya went to the fire, dropped a few of the herbs into the flames and watched them burn. The smoke rose in thick tendrils, filling the room with a pungent aroma. It wasn't unpleasant, but it was strange, like something ancient and otherworldly. "Are you a healer?" John asked, his curiosity piqued by the ritual she seemed to be performing. Naya didn't immediately answer. She was watching the smoke rise, her face soft with concentration. After a moment, she turned to look at him again, her expression unreadable. "The land heals us," she said simply. "It always heals us if we let it." John felt a chill run down his spine at the way she spoke, like she had a connection to something deeper than what he could understand, but he didn't press her. There was a respect in her silence, a way of carrying herself that made him hesitant to ask too many questions. Instead, he lay back on the cot again, trying to relax. The fire crackled softly, and he could hear the rain outside tapping against the roof. But sleep didn't come easily. Every time he closed his eyes, he found himself thinking about Naya. There was something about her, something that drew him in and made him want to know more. But at the same time, there was a wall around her, something that kept him at a distance. He sighed, his thoughts swirling around in his head like the storm outside. Naya finished with her herbs and came back to sit near the fire, her eyes flicking over to him once again. "You don't trust me," she said, her tone sharp, though there was no malice in it. "I can see it in your eyes." John blinked in surprise. He hadn't realized how obvious it must have been. "It's not that," he said quickly, his voice earnest. He paused, unsure how to explain it. "I'm not used to this." "To this?" Naya nodded as if she understood. "You're not used to being in someone else's world," she said quietly, her voice almost softer now. "You're used to your own rules, but out here the rules are different. The land has its own way of speaking. If you don't listen, it'll make you listen." John frowned, unsure what she meant, but something about the way she said it, the calm confidence in her voice, made him think that she wasn't just talking about the land. She was talking about something bigger, something deeper. As the night wore on, the storm outside showed no signs of letting up. John's eyes grew heavy, and eventually he drifted into a restless sleep. But even in his dreams, he could feel Naya's presence, like a force pulling at him, drawing him in. In the morning when he woke, the storm was still raging, but there was a quiet peace in the air. The fire had died down and Naya was gone. The room felt emptier without her presence, but also calmer, like the tension that had built up between them the night before had finally settled into something more manageable. John sat up, rubbing his eyes. He wasn't sure what the day would bring, but he knew one thing: there was more to Naya than met the eye. She wasn't just a girl living alone in the wild. She was something else, something he wasn't sure he was ready to understand, but he would have to. There was no turning back now. The storm showed no signs of stopping. The wind continued to howl outside, but inside the small cabin, the air felt warmer now, not just from the fire but from the strange connection that had begun to grow between John and Naya. The silence that had hung heavy in the air between them was gradually easing, replaced by a quiet understanding. They weren't friends, not yet, but they weren't strangers anymore either. The day after the storm had passed, the sky cleared and sunlight poured into the cabin through the small window. John stood up, stretching his sore muscles from the night on the cot. The weight of the world seemed to settle back on his shoulders, reminding him of the ranch waiting for him, of the troubles he had left behind. But for now, none of that seemed to matter. Naya was already awake, kneeling by the fire, tending to it. She moved with a grace that felt effortless, as if the land itself guided her. Her hair, now dry, fell around her face in dark waves, and her eyes were bright, alert, as if she hadn't slept at all. John watched her for a moment, unsure of what to say. She didn't seem like the kind of person who needed words, but something inside him told him he should try. "Morning," he said, his voice a little rough from sleep. Naya glanced up at him, a flicker of something in her eyes, amusement maybe, or just acknowledgement. "Morning," she replied simply, turning her attention back to the fire. She didn't seem to mind that he was there, or maybe she just didn't care. Either way, John appreciated the quiet. He sat down at the small wooden table, his thoughts swirling in a way he couldn't quite make sense of. He hadn't planned to stay long. He hadn't planned to stay at all, really. He just wanted shelter from the storm. But now, as the day broke around them, he realized how much he didn't want to leave. There was something about this place, about Naya, that kept him grounded, as if he had been swept into something bigger than himself. As if reading his mind, Naya stood up and began to gather things from the shelves. She moved with purpose, selecting a few tools and some dried meat. "You're hungry?" she asked, her voice soft, but there was no hesitation in it. John blinked in surprise. He hadn't expected her to offer. Yeah," he said, nodding. "I could eat." She handed him a small bundle of dried meat and pointed to the fire. "Sit there," she said, her tone firm but not unkind. "I'll make breakfast." John sat down by the fire, watching her as she prepared the food. He had never been one for fancy meals, and this wasn't fancy, but it was real. There was a rawness to it, something earthy, something honest. He could feel the connection to the land in the way she moved, in the way she worked. As she cooked, she started to talk, her words light and casual, as if they were just two people sitting around a fire, passing the time. "My people," she began without any preamble, "we don't waste things. Every part of the land has a purpose. The animals, the plants, even the wind, the water. We take what we need and we give something back." John listened carefully, not wanting to interrupt. She wasn't speaking in riddles, but there was a depth to her words, a way of seeing the world that he hadn't thought about before. "I'm not sure I understand all of it," he said after a pause, "but I get what you mean. People forget that sometimes. We take, and forget that the land gives us everything we need." Naya nodded, her face serious. "It's easy to forget," she said softly, "but it's a mistake. The land is alive and it watches, it remembers." John couldn't help but be drawn into her words. There was something so certain about the way she spoke, as if she had lived through all of this before and understood things he couldn't even begin to grasp. It made him feel small in a way, but not in a bad way. More like he had stepped into a world that he didn't fully understand, but that he wanted to. They ate in silence, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the soft crunch of dried meat. John felt a strange sense of peace, one that had eluded him for so long. The weight of his troubles seemed lighter somehow, as if they had been set aside in this simple moment. After breakfast, Naya gathered a few of her belongings, and John knew the time had come. He had to leave. The ranch wasn't going to take care of itself, and the trail ahead would only get harder the longer he stayed. But as he stood up and prepared to gather his things, Naya stopped him. "You're not leaving yet," she said, her voice calm but insistent. John blinked in surprise. I thought." She stood up, her eyes steady on his. The trail's muddy, the storm made it worse. You'll wait a few more hours, I'll show you something. He wanted to argue, to insist that he had to go, but there was something in her gaze that told him it would be a mistake. There was no point in rushing. All right, he said, settling back down. What will you show me? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned to a small chest near the corner of the room, taking out a bundle wrapped in cloth. She unfolded it slowly, revealing a set of tools John didn't recognize. There was a small knife with intricate carvings, a bundle of dried plants, and a pouch of herbs that seemed to shimmer in the firelight. These are from my people, Naya said quietly, her hands gently tracing over the items. Each one has a purpose. Each one tells a story. She handed him the small knife, and for a moment their fingers brushed. The contact was brief, but it sent a jolt through John that he couldn't ignore. He looked up at her, but she was already turning away, focusing on the tools again. These are more than just objects, she continued. They're part of who I am, part of who my people are. John held the knife carefully, running his fingers over the carvings. It was beautiful, unlike anything he had ever seen. You said before that the land gives us everything we need, he said, his voice thoughtful. Does that include these? Naya's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. Yes, she said simply. Everything comes from the land. We are its children, and it teaches us how to live. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. John held the knife, lost in thought. It was hard to put into words, but somehow, holding the tool in his hand made him feel connected to something bigger, something older. He didn't know if he believed in the land the way Naya did, but in that moment it didn't matter. He was learning something new, something real. The hours passed slowly, but in a good way. It wasn't long before the storm finally passed, and the air outside began to clear. John felt a sense of relief, but also something else. A strange sense of reluctance, as if leaving now would be like abandoning a part of himself that he wasn't ready to let go of. When the time finally came, Naya helped him pack his things. As he prepared to leave, he turned to her one last time. Thank you, he said, his voice sincere, for everything. Naya nodded, her eyes soft but unreadable. Don't forget what you learned here, she said quietly, and remember that the land remembers you. John didn't know what to say to that. He simply nodded and turned, walking toward the door. But as he stepped out into the sunlight, he couldn't shake the feeling that this place, and Naya, had changed something inside him. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew this was a beginning, not just for him, but for something greater. The morning after the storm cleared was bright and clear, the kind of day that seemed to promise new beginnings. John felt a stirring of hope, though he wasn't sure why. The road ahead was still long, and his ranch was waiting for him with all its problems and responsibilities. But for a moment, as he stood outside the small cabin, the world felt open, filled with possibilities. Naya stood beside him, silent as always, her eyes scanning the horizon. Her presence was steady and unyielding, like the land itself. She didn't look at him directly, but John could feel her awareness, the weight of her gaze pressing on him, as if she were reading him in ways he couldn't understand. John took a deep breath, the clean air filling his lungs. I should head out soon, he said, his voice carrying a sense of finality. He had stayed longer than he planned, and now it was time to face the reality of his own life. Naya didn't respond immediately. She just stood there unmoving as the wind gently tugged at her hair. Her expression was unreadable, but John could feel the tension building between them. He had grown used to the silence between them, but now it felt heavier, more charged. I have to go back, he continued, his words soft, almost reluctant. There's work to be done, and I can't leave the ranch in trouble for much longer. Naya finally turned to face him, her eyes sharp, focused. You think the ranch is your only responsibility? She asked, her voice low but firm. You think that's the only thing you should care about? John frowned, surprised by the intensity in her voice. What do you mean? The land isn't just about the work, Naya said, stepping closer to him. It's about understanding. It's about respect. You can't just take from it and leave whenever it's convenient for you. It's not yours to control. John felt a flicker of frustration rise within him. He wasn't used to being challenged like this, especially not by someone who barely knew him. I never said it was mine to control, he replied, his tone a little sharper than he intended. I'm just trying to keep things running. I'm trying to survive just like everyone else. Naya's eyes softened, but her stance didn't waver. I didn't say it was easy, she said quietly. I didn't say it wasn't hard, but you have to choose. You can't keep running, John. You have to decide where your loyalties lie. John stared at her, his heart beating faster now. He could feel the weight of her words pressing down on him, but he wasn't sure how to respond. There was a part of him that understood what she was saying. He had spent so much of his life focused on the ranch, on keeping the land in his hands, that he hadn't stopped to think about what he was sacrificing in the process. But another part of him, one that had been ingrained in him for years, wanted to push back, to defend the life he had built, no matter how hard it was. I don't have a choice, he said, his voice thick with the weight of his responsibility. The ranch is my family's legacy. It's all I have left. Naya's gaze was steady, unwavering. You think that's all you have? She asked, her voice quiet but filled with meaning. The land is not just something to possess. It's not just about your family's legacy. It's about connection. It's about life. John felt a pang of doubt in his chest, a small crack in the armor he had built around himself. She was right in ways he didn't want to admit. The land had been more to him than just a source of work. It had been a symbol, a connection to the past, to everything he had lost. But now, standing here with Naya, he couldn't help but wonder if he had been seeing it all wrong. I'm not asking you to leave your life behind, Naya continued, her voice gentler now. But I'm asking you to understand. I'm asking you to listen, to what the land says, to what the world around you is telling you. John looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time since meeting her, he saw the depth of her wisdom. It wasn't just her words, it was in the way she moved, the way she lived, the way she carried herself. She wasn't just surviving out here, she was thriving. And maybe, just maybe, there was something he could learn from her. I don't know how to listen like you do, he admitted, his voice soft. I don't know how to hear what the land is saying. Naya smiled, a small, knowing smile. You will, you just have to be willing to try. The moment between them hung in the air, thick with unspoken understanding. John felt a shift inside him, a quiet recognition that he was at a crossroads. He could return to the ranch, return to the life he knew, but he knew it would never be the same. Naya had planted a seed in his mind, and now he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to life than what he had been chasing all these years. You're right, he said quietly, his voice full of uncertainty, but I don't know if I can just leave everything behind. Naya's eyes softened and she took a step closer to him. I'm not asking you to leave everything behind, she said gently. I'm asking you to open your eyes, to see what you've been missing. For a moment the world seemed to stand still. The wind had quieted and the sky was a soft, pale blue stretching out in all directions. John felt the weight of her words settle over him, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he had all the answers. He didn't feel like he had to control everything. I'm not sure what comes next, John said, his voice quiet but resolute. But I'll figure it out. Naya nodded as if she had already known what he was going to say. You will. You're stronger than you think. There was something in her eyes now, something softer, more vulnerable, that made John's heart beat faster. He had never seen this side of her before, and it was like she was letting him in, letting him see the person behind the fierce exterior. For the first time since meeting her, John felt like he truly understood her. I guess we both have a lot to learn, he said with a half smile. Naya smiled back, though it was small and hesitant. We all do. The moment felt like the beginning of something, something neither of them could yet define. John didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time he felt like he had a choice. A real choice. The day stretched out before them, the land around them vast and endless. John knew the trail ahead would be long and the decision would not be easy. But as he stood there with Naya, he felt a quiet certainty inside him, a certainty that this was the right place, with the right person, and that somehow things would work out. But the choice was his, and only he could make it. The sun was setting, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, casting long shadows over the vast land. The light had a warm, golden quality to it, the kind that made everything feel more vivid, more alive. But for John, the beauty of the evening couldn't drown out the storm brewing inside him. It had been days since he had met Naya, and every moment since had pulled him deeper into a place he wasn't sure he was ready to go. But the question was no longer whether he was ready. The question was whether he could face the truth of his own heart. He stood by the cabin, looking out across the wide, empty plains, the wind tugging at his shirt. His mind was a whirlwind, filled with thoughts of the ranch, the responsibility, the duty, the weight of it all. He had spent his whole life building something, maintaining it, protecting it. It had been his family's legacy, his purpose. But standing here now, looking out at the land, something had shifted. The truth was simple but difficult. His heart wasn't in it anymore. Naya had been a presence at his side for days now, but in many ways she had already slipped past the walls he had built around himself. She had seen through the things he had hidden even from himself. She didn't ask him to leave everything behind, but her words had planted seeds in his mind, seeds that had begun to grow into something new. The land wasn't just something to own. It wasn't just a place for work and sweat. It was living, breathing, connected to everything. And maybe, just maybe, it was time for him to stop running and start listening. Turning, John saw Naya standing a few feet away, her dark hair blowing in the wind, her face serious but calm. She had always carried herself with such quiet strength, like she didn't need anyone's approval to be who she was. He admired that in her, though it made him feel small in a way. She had a purpose, one that was bigger than just surviving. She lived for something more, something beyond herself. "Are you ready to go?" Naya asked, her voice breaking the silence. She wasn't looking at him now, but at the land around them, her eyes distant, as though she could see the world in a way he couldn't. John opened his mouth to answer, but the words didn't come immediately. He wanted to say that he was ready, but the truth was more complicated. He wasn't sure what he was ready for. The ranch, the land, the life he had built, it all seemed to blur together in a way that made it difficult to separate his past from his future. "I'm not sure," he said quietly. "I've spent so long trying to hold onto what I know. I've been afraid of letting go, afraid of change." Naya's eyes softened and she took a step toward him, her gaze never leaving his. "It's not about letting go, John. It's about knowing when it's time to let something new in." Her words hung in the air, lingering between them. John's chest tightened as he looked at her, the weight of everything he had carried for so long pressing down on him. He had always thought he needed to protect what was his ranch, his family's legacy. But what if protecting it meant destroying everything else? What if there was a way to honor his past and build something new, something that wasn't just about survival? "You're right," he said finally, the words tasting strange on his tongue. "I've been holding onto the past so tightly, thinking it was the only thing I could count on. But I don't know anymore. I don't know if it's enough." Naya gave him a small nod, her expression unreadable but soft. "Sometimes we have to stop fighting against what's meant to be," she said, her voice steady. "Sometimes we have to choose a different path." John's heart raced as he felt a shift inside him. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid. The decision wasn't about choosing one thing over another. It was about embracing the unknown. It was about stepping into a new chapter without knowing exactly what it would hold. "I can't stay here forever," he said, his voice more certain now. "But I don't want to leave things behind. I want to do better. I want to understand more. I want to listen." Naya smiled at him, her eyes soft but full of wisdom. "You don't have to have all the answers right now. Just take the first step." John looked down at the ground, the weight of her words settling over him. He had spent so many years trying to control everything, trying to hold on to a past that no longer fit him. But now, with Naya standing beside him, he realized that it wasn't about control. It was about understanding, about connection, about being present in the moment. "I'm not sure what that first step is," he said, his voice quieter now, almost uncertain. "But I'll take it. With you." Naya's smile grew wider, and for the first time there was a softness to her that John hadn't seen before. It was as if she were letting him in, letting him see the person behind the strength, behind the independence. "I'll be here," she said simply, her voice carrying a quiet promise. John nodded, the weight lifting from his shoulders just a little. The path ahead wasn't clear, but that didn't matter anymore. He wasn't alone. Naya had shown him that there was more to life than just surviving. There was meaning to be found in every step, in every choice, and that was enough. As the sky darkened and the stars began to appear, John and Naya stood together, looking out over the land. The world felt bigger now, fuller, as if there were endless possibilities waiting to be discovered. The wind had quieted, and in the stillness of the evening, John felt a sense of peace wash over him. He didn't know where the future would lead. He didn't know what the next day, the next year, or the next chapter would hold. But for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to face it. The land, the people, the connections. He would learn to listen. He would learn to live in a way that honored the past but didn't trap him in it. "Let's go," he said to Naya, his voice steady and strong. "Wherever it takes us." And with that they turned toward the future, walking side by side into the unknown, together.